story you're about to hear is an encounter so chilling. It'll torment your thoughts by day and haunt your dreams at night. But some nightmares never end, even after you wake. Welcome to Dark Note. It was in the early 2000s when Cameron, age 10, traveled across the country for a 2-week vacation with his mother, his father, and his younger brother. They were on their way to a family reunion located right on the border of New Hampshire and Vermont at the Lake Maury Resort. They booked a flight to New Jersey where they would rent a vehicle to drive the rest of the way to the reunion. On the way there, they stopped in New Hampshire to meet with Cameron's aunt and uncle, where they spent the night and would all set out in a convoy to the resort the next morning. They would spend 5 days at the resort, enjoying their time as a family and catching up with relatives they hadn't seen for quite some time. As their stay at the resort came to an end, Cameron and his family would say their goodbyes and begin their journey to a hotel located about an hour or two away from the Lake Maury Resort. They would stop along the way to check out different landmarks and take family photos to add to the photo album back at home. Continuing down this long stretch of road, Cameron's father saw flashing lights coming up over the horizon. As the lights got closer, the sound from the sirens grew in volume. Cameron's father pulled over to the side of the road to let them pass. As fire trucks and police cars rushed by going at a high rate of speed, his father became curious of where they were headed in such a hurry, so he followed the emergency service vehicles up the road he saw them turn down to investigate what was going on. As they slowly drove up over the hill, they began to see smoke billowing from overhead. In the distance, Cameron and his family saw an old Victorian house up in flames. The fire engulfed the house with such rage, it was a surprise the old structure was still standing. Cameron's father stopped the car about 50 yards away so as to not disturb the firefighters as they fought the blaze. They all exited the vehicle, and Cameron's father pulled out his binoculars to get a closer look. His father eventually handed the binoculars to his brother and asked if he would like to see the fire. Cameron's brother was full of excitement as he took the binoculars and began inspecting the burning house. After a few minutes, Cameron's brother looked over at him and asked if he wanted to take a look through the binoculars to see the fire. Cameron shook his head yes, then took the binoculars and slowly started to scan the house from one side to the other, watching the flames as they scorched every inch of the home. He directed his attention to the upper level of the house when he caught a glimpse of something moving in one of the windows. He doubled back, focusing on the area, and what he saw would stay with him for as long as he lives. Standing in the window of the burning house was a woman in an old Victorian-style red dress, with a thin black veil covering her face. She had this menacing smile, a grin that went from ear to ear. Her skin was pale white like that of a corpse, and her eyes were black and hollow. Her stare was empty, but endless and cold. as if she was peering into your soul, uncovering your deepest fears. Cameron felt a sense of dread as the hair on the back of his neck stood up straight and an overwhelming feeling of unease shivered through his bones. Cameron was locked in on the window, unable to move, paralyzed with fear. She never broke eye contact with him. Then within seconds, her mouth slowly dropped down as her jaw dislocated from its sockets. Cameron quickly pulled the binoculars away, and the color immediately drained from his face. His brother noticed something was off with him and asked what was wrong. Cameron told his brother he saw a woman in the window of the house. He told him about her dark eyes and how her jaw shifted out of place. His brother didn't believe him and told Cameron he was making up the whole thing to try and scare him. But Cameron swore he saw her staring at him through the window of that burning house. But his brother laughed it off and told him to stop being so overdramatic. Cameron walked towards the car, still shaking with fear from what he had just witnessed. His father grabbed his shoulder and asked if everything was okay. Cameron looked at his father and told him everything was fine, then continued over to the car. As he reached for the handle, he turned his attention into the forest surrounding them. In the middle of the forest stood the same woman he had seen in the window, the woman in red. She seemed normal at first, but as she looked up at Cameron, her eyes quickly blackened, and her jaw dropped down out of its sockets once again. Blood started to drip from her veil, covering her dress. Her body started to contort and violently shake around as if she was having a seizure. Then all at once, her erratic shaking stopped. She stared at Cameron as she slowly raised her arm and pointed directly at him. She let out a horrific shrieking sound and disappeared into the woods at the blink of an eye, leaving Cameron spiraling in his own thoughts. Cameron's family still had a 45-minute drive to the hotel they would be staying at for the night, so they hit the road to try and make it there before sundown. On the way there, Cameron drifted off to sleep. He had a dream he was in the middle of a pitch-black forest, when the woman in red emerged from out of the fog, chasing him through the woods. He would run as fast as he could, but with no effort, she kept gaining on him. He hid behind a tree to try and catch his breath, looking in all directions. He couldn't see her anywhere. Right when he thought he had escaped the clutches of the woman in red, she appeared right next to him, unleashing her deafening screech. Cameron woke up startled to his brother shaking him. They had finally made it to the hotel. They all gathered their belongings and checked in at the front desk. Extremely tired, they went straight up to their room to get some sleep from the long drive they had endured. The next morning, Cameron and his family went down to the hotel cafe to have breakfast. At some point through their meal, they overheard some locals talking about the burning house in the next town over. One of the investigators working on the case had told his friend that worked at the hotel what they had discovered inside the house. And this being a small town, everyone knew everyone, so word always traveled fast. The investigator told his friend that they had recovered a body from inside the home. He had revealed that the dead man was a local that everyone knew as the town drunk. A young man in his late 20s to early 30s. He was obsessed with the old house. He would ramble on and on to everyone in town about how the house was haunted. He always told the same story about how he had seen a woman in red peering through the windows at him. He would tell everyone that she was attached to him, showing up in his dreams and haunting him every second of his life. Investigators never found out what caused the fire or why the man was there at the house that day. Cameron's curiosity piqued. He wanted to know more about this woman in red, so he asked the couple sitting across from them if they knew the house's historic origin. They proceeded to tell Cameron and his family about this gypsy woman that had escaped from her home country of Romania in the mid-1850s. She was accused of performing witchcraft that cursed her town. She was about to stand trial for a suspected arson case, but fled Romania before authorities could ensure her capture. She escaped to America, crossing the Atlantic as a stowaway on an old charter ship, and would end up in the big city of New York approximately 8 to 10 weeks later. After arriving in America, she met a man and they both fell in love, and after only 5 months, they would marry, eventually moving away from the city to a more rural area on top of that hill in the old Victorian house, living in seclusion. In 1861, the Civil War erupted and her husband was sent out to the front lines of battle, but as the end of the war was approaching, he was killed during combat, leaving her widowed and alone in that house. Months after the devastating loss of her husband, not able to deal with his death, she ended her suffering in the attic where the townsfolk found her hanging from the rafters, and the house remained abandoned for years to come. The story was told that her spirit still haunts the grounds, attaching herself to various individuals. No one dares to enter the property in fear they might become her next victim, appearing at your most vulnerable moments. Even the slightest mention of her is said to summon her presence. Cameron felt sick to his stomach. He had a terrible feeling that this wasn't over, that this wasn't the last time he would be seeing the woman in red. The next day, Cameron and his family left the hotel and caught a flight back home. Cameron thought about his experience with the woman in red every day since his return from his vacation. It had been a week and a half since he had seen her last back in New Hampshire. Until that very night, Cameron had a dream that he was back in the forest, when the woman in red appeared from the shadows, chasing Cameron through the woods. But no matter how many times he tried to escape her, she would always find him. And every night for an entire year, the woman in red would show up in Cameron's nightmares, tormenting him over and over again. Then all of a sudden, the nightmares stopped, and Cameron wouldn't have a single nightmare about her for months. Then one day, Cameron was at his friend Cal's house with a few others, and they all wanted to play hide and seek. Cal had a fairly decent-sized yard with a small forest surrounding the property. Cal volunteered to go first since it was his house. He counted to 20 as everyone split up to find a hiding spot. After Cal was done counting, he would run around the yard to find everybody. Cameron was the first one he found, so that meant he was the next one up to try and locate his friends. So after Cal found everyone else, it was Cameron's turn. So Cameron covered his eyes and faced the wall. He started to count to 20 as everyone ran off to hide. Cameron was still counting when this uneasy feeling came over him. He stopped counting and slowly turned around. Standing in the tree line was the woman in red, staring at Cameron with her unsettling grin. Then her mouth dropped down. She let out a horrific screeching sound and disappeared from sight. Cameron was terrified, frozen in place. When he then heard a voice behind him say, "Cameron, are you okay?" He turned around to see there was no one there. He heard the voice once more. "Cameron, are you okay?" He turned again and saw Cal walking towards him. Cal then asked, "Are you okay?" Cameron told Cal everything was fine, and that he should go hide so he could find him. Cal said, "All right," and then ran away. Cameron turned back to the wall and started to count from where he left off, when he heard a faint whisper right in his ear say, "I'm coming for you." Now in his mid-30s, Cameron is still haunted by the woman in red. She still visits him in his dreams and appears at his most vulnerable moments. Will he ever escape the clutches of the woman in red? Only time will tell, but for now she remains, as his reminder that the past is never truly buried. Well, that's it for today's story. Tell me what you think about this encounter down in the comments below. Like and subscribe for more. And if you have ever had a strange or mysterious encounter, submit your story to the Dark Note submission site. The link will be down in the description. I'll be waiting.